Power chords. Lots of guitarists, when they start out, one of the first things they learn, especially if they're trying to play rock, blues, metal, punk, post-punk, all sorts of genres, have the bread and butter of power chords. So why are they so popular and ubiquitous in guitar music? What makes them so easy? And how do we get them in the first place? I'll tell you all about it today. So let's get started. Since we're learning about power chords, I thought it'd be cool to take a quick look at how we got them in the first place. So, like many guitar techniques and genres spanning from rock and roll outward, its origins can be traced back to the blues. And so the blues was developed under tragic circumstances in the American South during the Civil War and post-Civil War Jim Crow segregation era, where Black Americans were subjugated as second-class citizens. It was developed by these people going through toils and troubles and using music as a catharsis to express their blues. And through this genre, we got the 12-bar blues formation, and that's one variation, but this was developed with blues, and you can start to hear how power chords were already coming in without distortion. The modern power chord as we know it today started getting developed in the 1950s. Late blues rock recordings, especially from Sun Studios in Memphis. You had Howlin' Wolf with Willie Johnson's guitar work on How Many More Years. You had Scotty Moore's guitar work on Jailhouse Rock by Elvis Presley. And then in 1958, the game changed. linktr.ee developed the beginnings of distorted electric guitar by literally ripping his amplifier cone and messing up or distorting the sound. And he came up with this instrumental called Rumble. This D chord, that's a power chord. And then he combined it with distorted guitar and it started taking it to a new level. In the 60s, you had the Kinks, You Really Got Me, and a lot of Beatles songs. I wanna hold your hand. Going through the 60s with Jimi Hendrix and all sorts of amazing things he did for the guitar. In the 70s with Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, going on further into Aerosmith and hair metal with Guns N' Roses and Eddie Van Halen. Going into the 90s with Kurt Cobain from Nirvana, Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day, The Cranberries, Rivers Cuomo from Weezer, and all of these other bands such as the Pixies and Ween. By then, it had become kind of in the mainstream, and this hair metal and this rock and roll, it was defined by power chords. So why is it that power chords are so popular with rock music? Well, there are many reasons, but we're going to go over a few of them today, especially highlighting why they're so easy and translatable all across the fretboard. So first, if you don't know how, let's learn how to play some power chords. Power chords are one of the easiest chord formations to fret on the guitar. And real quick, let's look at the easiest version. We're going to look at an E power chord, an open one. Only one finger is required. All we're going to do is put our index finger on the second fret of the A string and then strum the E and the A strings together, and you get this sound. You've heard that in all sorts of stuff. For example, where did we go there? We started doing a new shape. This is the shape that we are going to look at today. This is the movable power chord, and there's a couple different ways to play it. I would say the most standard is the following. You take your index finger on whatever root note you want to play. So let's take 3rd fret of the A string, which is a C note. And so we're going to fret that, and our index finger's there. Now we're going to take our ring finger, and we're going to put it on the 5th fret of the string below it. In this case, it's the D string. Now, this shape you can use just by itself, just like we were talking about with the E chord, just 2 strings. Yeah, we already got that power chord sound. Now, many times you'll find people will also play an octave of our root note. So C is here, and there's another C up here. So this is like our 3-string version of a power chord, like this. That is very, very common, the 2-string and the 3-string. So, going on from that, you can have alterations where you throw a lower note down and things. Today, we're going to look at the 2 and 3 string version because this is our bread and butter of power chords. If you're having trouble making that initial power chord shape, here's a couple quick tips for you that are also helpful for other parts of guitar. A lot of beginning guitarists that I see, including myself when I was younger, have this problem of mixing up finger pressure versus general hand tension, and I'll explain what I mean. So when you're fretting a note, what you want to be able to do, as you know, is press it hard enough to where you get the note ringing out clearly, right? So that requires a certain amount of pressure. So many people think they have to like hammer and grip for their lives on this, and that's how they get this sound. And there are many reasons why you don't want to do that. And you're like, why did that power chord sound out of tune? Well, quickly, let's look at that. If you press too hard, this is regular. If I press too hard, you can literally hear it bend up. And that's because you're bending down on the note so much that you create a vibrato and it goes out of tune. But more than that, what's really important is when you have too much hand tension and excessive finger pressure, this thing happens where you have no more flexibility in your hand because it's like, you're anchoring it down. And so many beginning guitarists fool themselves into thinking they don't have the dexterity to play like they want to. And the truth is, they just need to loosen their hands some more. The other thing I see a lot of beginning guitarists struggle with at first is this idea of angling your finger pressure correctly. So let's think about this. If you have your fingers really far back with the wrist this way, what finger angle am I at here? My fingers are not even able to press into the board. Look at where my finger's pointing. It's pointing straight towards the ceiling. And so this creates this false notion that you need to press for your life in order to get that to ring, because the way you're pressing it is super inefficient. And what you want to develop is this idea of correcting your finger pressure so that way, instead of pressing up on a string this way, you want to press more onto it. And using your wrist to come more out here, watch what happens. My hand naturally opens up, and now my finger has a lot less trouble doing this little arch, and it's pressing more onto the fretboard as opposed to up and into the air. So, because of this, you can play with much less pressure and get the note, as opposed to back here, you kind of lose it, and this also creates this tension that makes it very hard to move your hand around. You're basically robbing yourself of your own leverage. But if you come out here, you get way more dexterity and movement. Speaking of finger pointing, don't look at me! I'm just kidding. So, the idea of power chords, and one reason why they're so intuitive and easy to understand, and useful for understanding the fretboard and music theory in general, is this. When you fret a power chord, where's your finger pointing? It's pointing right at the root note of the power chord. So because of that, it makes it very intuitive to understand, oh, if my finger is on a C note and I make the shape of a power chord, what do I have? I have a C power chord. And because of that, it makes it really, really easy for beginning guitarists to understand how to play them, and also learning more songs with power chords in them, they might start to learn the letters, and it helps them memorize the fretboard in different ways. So eventually you know that, oh, 7th fret of the A string is an E, because I know in that one song this was an E chord. Anyway, so because of that, it makes power chords really, really easy for beginning guitarists just learning about note letters to understand how they work and how other things in music work. The second reason why power chords are so easy to understand and to use in music is because they are so symmetrical. So, you know, many things on guitar are translatable across the fretboard, and you kind of need to know a little bit of an anchor note, like, oh, this is the root note. So if I want to move it to a new key, I need to know where that new note is. But power chords are even easier. All you have to know is, what root note do you want to play? Find that root note, make your shape, and you're off to the races. So let's look at this shape one more time. we've got our index finger pointing at the root. We're taking a C note, so a C chord here. And then the easiest way is to just take your ring finger floating over here with our nice arch and just plop it onto the string below it, the D string in this case, 2 frets up. So you can just hit those 2 strings. Power chord. Awesome. You can also add on this pinky to get the full octave version, C and C. That's the one I most commonly use, and you'll find it in all sorts of genres. So the reason that this is so helpful is because once you know the shape, wherever your finger is pointing, you can just use that as your guide. C chord, D chord, E chord, A chord, and so on. The exact same shape will work all throughout the fretboard. There is an exception once you go to the D string because the pinky kind of needs to do a new shape. We're not going to go too much into that, but that's because of the same reason why when you check your tuning, you do 5th fret, 5th fret, 5th fret, oh, and then G to B, you do 4th fret. It's the only string that has a different relationship to the other strings. Instead of going up at 4th or 4 letters, it goes up 3 letters instead. So we'll learn more about that another time around. So overall, that makes power chords super easily translatable. And you don't even got to look at the fretboard, right? And so that is really, really helpful when we're trying to learn how to play songs, is to have an easy shape that we can practice moving between frets on and finding notes on the fretboard. So the third and final reason I'll show you why power chords are so easy and so popular on guitar is simple. There's no third in the chord. And so what does that mean? Basically, the third in a chord defines whether or not that sound of the chord is happy, bright, or major, or minor, dark, sad. And if you take a regular chord, let's look at a C chord, the root note is C, and then we have the third, C, D, E, and then the fifth, so C, D, E, F, G, okay? The root, the third, and the fifth together make up a standard sounding chord. And if we do the bottom 3 notes of a G chord, or a C chord, we get that happy sound. But if we play our power chord formation, watch what happens. We have no E, and therefore it still feels nice, but it's not happy or sad. We have to add a third to give you context. So here's a happy third or a major C. And then if I switch this major third down 1 fret, 1 little fret on that B string on the 5th fret going down to the 4th fret, we take our power chord here. Now it sounds sad, and that's because the third gives our ears this relationship between the root and the third. And that tells us whether it's happy or sad, bright or dark, major or minor. And because of that, that means it's so translatable. Say you have a chord progression that mixes major and minor, like a lot of them do. Let's say there's a C chord and a D minor, and then an F major and a G. Well, if you don't know how to tell major and minor, it doesn't matter, because if you just play the power chord versions, finding the root note, C, if I'm playing open chords, I have to play 1, 2, 3, 4 different shapes, typically speaking. But with power chords, it's just 1, then it's 1, and it's the same 1 again. And so because of that, that makes it very, very easy to understand and to plug in into any song you want. And so especially punk artists and rock and roll artists took advantage of this in composition, and they might go outside of keys, but they're just using power chords, and so it still sounds pretty good, you know. And because of that, you can kind of do notes that might be outside of your typical scale, and it doesn't matter as much because you're not mixing major and minor in ways that confuse our ears and lead us off the trail. And this is why power chords in many bits of sheet music and tabs, they call them, say, a C5, because it's only the root C and the 5, D, E, F, G, together. Without a third, it's ambiguous, and you can use it in a major or minor context. Okay, so today we learned about power chords, how to play them, where they came from, and why they're so popular in rock music, from being translatable and substitutions for either major or minor chords. So, if you liked today's lesson, please leave a comment, like, subscribe, share it with your friends. It's the YouTube stuff. I don't make the rules. I just work here. So, I really appreciate you watching. Let me know what other things you would like to learn about, or songs you would like to learn how to play, or music theory concepts you want to learn. We're covering it all in this music tutorial series. And until then, I'll catch you next time around. Goodbye.